Good evening. Today is October 31st. This is Paul Glumaz with the LaRouche Political Action Committee, and this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. So tonight is Hallows Eve. I don't like the word Halloween. I like the word Hallows Eve because tomorrow is the Day of the Dead. It's where you celebrate those who have passed away. But in our culture, we don't celebrate the people who have passed away. We merely want to have a chance to dress up in costumes and act weird for each other. I don't know how we departed from the tradition of the past to this kind of situation where Halloween may very well be the number one religious event in in the United States. I don't know if you want to call it a religious event, but nonetheless, Halloween is the appropriate time for all of the goings on that you're watching in Washington, in the Beltway, and we were all surprised when Mueller's indictment of Manafort, the charges on which Manafort was indicted, had no relationship to the Trump campaign, nor to any mention of Russia. And there was a tangential relationship with this guy Papadopoulos, who seems to have been a plant and seems to have been trying to set up the Trump campaign with respect to Russia. So you have to ask yourself, well, what the hell is going on? This great investigation that has been going on, consuming thousands of man hours and some of the top lawyers of the country being brought in to serve under the Special Counsel Robert Muller. So you have to ask yourself, well, what's going on here? Why is he not indicting people for collusion with Russia? Why is he indicting people who he claims had broken certain laws involving registering as a foreign agent, or money laundering, or taxes? What's going on here? Is it that Manafort, they were trying to get Manafort to turn on Trump, and because he was his campaign manager, and then have him falsely testify against Trump and use that to force Trump out of office? Is that what was going on? Or is that just too simple? And then in the middle of all this, the other individuals that were working with Manafort's, this is going back to 2013, 2014, the other individual that was working with Manafort in terms of advising Yanukovych in Ukraine, who was running for president, was the Podesta group. Now, who are the Podestas? Podesta ran Hillary's campaign, one of the brothers, John Podesta, and he has something called the Center for American Progress, which is a leading operation. They're a leading lobbying group, and they ran Hillary's campaign. What's the people running Hillary's campaign in the middle of the Yanukovych operation with Manafort, who helped to recast the image of Yanukovych so he could win the election, and he was legitimately elected in Ukraine. Now, this is the same guy who was illegitimately the victim of a coup run by U.S., British, EU, billions and billions of dollars to finance Nazi militias, Nazi gangs, to overthrow Yanukovych and launch this whole crisis. So here you have both Tony and John Podesta involved with Manafort in all of this. And the Russia angle is that Yanukovych was supposed to be a stooge for Putin. Well, he was not a stooge for Putin. He was a legitimately elected guy in Ukraine. And Putin didn't like him anyhow, because he was corrupt. So they didn't really care for him. But they didn't want Ukraine to be run over by a bunch of Nazis who began to oppress the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine, which caused the crisis, which is a provocation to the Russians, because they're people who are ethnic Russians and Russian speakers were being murdered. What are the Russia going to do when people of your ethnicity and of your nationality who live in Ukraine, which used to be part of Russia, are being murdered by a bunch of Nazis? What do? Well, they didn't go in. They didn't invade. Parts of Ukraine, which were predominantly Russian, seceded. That's the Crimea, the Donbass, and Lugansk. Okay, so why is this going on? But then there's the other question. The laws that were allegedly broken by Manafort, which may not have been broken, are the laws that are broken every day by all the major lobbying groups, who include lobbying for foreign interests. How many people take money from the Saudis in Washington? Every congressman, probably. And who are the lobbying groups that are operating on behalf of the Saudis? And are they following all the rules? And what about the British? And what about all the other countries? You could probably indict every lobbyist in Washington for not complying with all the regulations, because it's very loose. Okay? And so what is the message that Mueller is sending out to all the lobby groups in Washington who are involved with foreign governments? And then you have all this thing about, foreigners run Washington, and, well, they do. The British are the biggest one of the foreigners that run Washington. The Saudis are number 2. Israel's probably 2 or 3. But do they really run Washington? But so you have this entire complication added on to the whole issue of Russiagate. There's nothing on Trump, but now all of a sudden you have all this stuff emerging. Well, why? Why are they doing this? Is it that they're now going to start to go after everybody and create such a mess that nobody trusts anybody, and everybody's fighting everybody, and everybody's backstabbing everybody? How is government going to function when all the lobbyists are how is Congress going to function? Is this going to be the blackmail of all the congressmen that want to work with Trump? Is this going to be the blackmail to prevent a bipartisan agreement between those Republicans and those Democrats that want to work with Trump to deal with certain issues? So what the hell is going on here? Is this no longer about Russiagate? This thing is morphed into something else. And then what do you have? You have the Dossier. And who paid for the Dossier? Did the FBI pay for this Dossier? Paul Singer paid for part of the Dossier, for the Dossier. Who is he? He is the hedge fund guy who buys up all the debt that's been defaulted on, and then he goes into the U.S. court to try to seize the assets of the countries involved. He is this guy is out to kill people on a mass scale by seizing the assets of countries that default on their debt. He buys it up for a nickel or a dime and gets full payment. He did this with Argentina. Damn near destroyed Argentina. He paid for some of this. Then the DNC paid for it. Then Hillary paid for it. And then who do they use to pay and the Seattle law firms, Perkins and Coie, which is the Democratic Party law firm, they paid them to pay for this for these dossiers. But then it's the British intelligence who began to monitor Trump back in 2015, in June 2015. And they're the ones who started the whole process back in June 2015. So all of this is coming out. And then the stonewalling of the efforts of the congressional committees to get a hand on the records through Toronto Dominion Bank that GPS Fusion got money for this dossier. And then there's all the leaks, okay? And then you find out that it was Priebus and Kushner, according to some, who allowed for this guy Rosenstein to be brought in as Assistant Secretary, Assistant Attorney General, who on his own appointed Mueller, who is the protege of Comey. Comey tried to set up Trump. So what the hell is going on? This is all blowing up. And where is it going to end? If it is ever going to end. So how do you make sense of all this? Well, here's how I make sense of it. Okay? Basically, you have two different paradigms in the world. Okay? You have the new paradigm associated with what the Chinese are doing around the Belt and Road, which involves the whole world. It involves all the countries of the world. It involves Chinese relationships to all the countries of the world for the development of the world, for the development of the infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And on the heels of that, you're going to see a massive increase in the productive power of labor, and a massive increase in the physical production, and a massive advances in science and technology, and all of that. And it's what came out of all of this was enshrined in the Party Congress of the 19th Party Congress of the Communist Party in China. So here you have a paradigm of a shared common destiny, which is working with the same concept with Putin. And they're trying to solve all these problems. They're trying to cool everything out, get everyone working together to end the terrorism and create the environment for development in the Middle East and Africa and elsewhere. And what else do you have? You have another force with a very different paradigm coming in to run terrorism, to run drugs, to opiate the population, to demoralize the population with demoralizing culture, corrupt. What are these? What's their vision of the world? 500 million to 2 billion people when it's all said and done. That's their vision of the world. It's not development. It's population reduction. It's not development. It's a new form of feudalism. It's not development. It is going backward in time. And a lot of people are infected with, all the stuff that comes out of this, but the people that are infected aren't the ones directing it. Just like the people who are responding to the Chinese developments are not directing it themselves. They're responding to the opportunities created by what China's doing. But the Chinese leadership does have a sense of where they're going. And therefore, those who are reflecting that sense are doing everything possible to organize the United States into participating in this development. Now, when Donald Trump goes over to Asia on November 3rd, he's bringing 40 CEOs of major corporations, including GE and Boeing. Now, all these corporations are manufacturing corporations that have had to accommodate to the new system of financial services and financial speculation, and they've had to turn their cash flows into more a financial thing than they do production. But here's an opportunity to massively expand production and export capital export whatever they can export from the U.S., whatever workers they can hire in the U.S. to export to the process that China is leading. So 40 of these top people are going with Trump, and they will be meeting with the Japanese and the South Koreans and the Chinese and the Asian nations in Vietnam and the Philippines. 40. And probably Russia as well, because Russia is going to be at the APEC summit. And Putin will probably meet with Trump. So this is big. This is big. This is an opportunity. But who's organizing it? Who's pulling it together? Who's creating the structure? It's the Chinese. But it's beneficial to many, many, many human beings on the planet. It's beneficial to the U.S. Industry, what's left of it. But that's not the paradigm that the other side is operating on. And who is running that? Well, that's being run out of Great Britain. They're the ones that know. They're the ones that have their vision, and they're the ones that know where they're taking the world. And the rest of us are being driven by different ways into that, through the drug trade or through terrorism or through divide and conquer or through conflicts or hotspots or the Middle East or North Korea or things that get set up. We're being driven by the mass media, and the mass media is what they control. And so we're driven into the right-left conflicts, and we're driven into the Democrat versus Republican. And so out of all of this, they hope to collapse humanity down to about 500 million to 2 billion people. And perhaps a nuclear war will be necessary, but that's pretty risky. Everybody might go on that one. So that's the other organizing force. And they have a vision. And but people don't know that. So now all of this is colliding inside the Beltway. All of this is colliding inside the Beltway. Because Trump is open to the new paradigm that is not for killing off most of the world's population, that is not for destroying the population. He's open to it. But then he has a mess. He has Wall Street. He has the Republicans. He has the ecological element of the Democratic Party to deal with. But the mass majority of Americans, or at least a good part of them, are open to working with Trump, are open to supporting Trump, because he's not any of that. But how is he going to implement the policies of working with China and joining the Belt and Road Initiative? Well, one of the problems is Wall Street. Like you take this so-called tax reform. What is this thing, this tax reform? They're going to cut taxes and collapse the revenue. How is cutting taxes is going to increase the revenue? Well, the corporations will have more money if you cut taxes. But why do they need to have more money? Because they're piling up a lot of debt to service. Corporate debt is up to $14 trillion in the United States. And every dollar that you save, you're leveraging $100 worth of debt, or $50 worth of debt, or $20 worth of debt. So what's driving the tax reform is the corporate bailout of the bankrupt corporate debt structure. That's why stocks are going up for all these companies. But not all of these companies need to go into a productive mode, not be piling up debt. So that's why they're passing this thing, and they want to get it done by Thanksgiving, because that's the only way they can keep the financial system afloat. So the tax reform is nothing to do with the tax or the reform. It has to do with bailing out the financial system. And Trump can't stop that. Because if he does, the whole thing collapses. And he'll be blamed for it. So he's got to go along until it collapses. And then when it collapses, he doesn't have to go along. But that's coming. So that's the other factor that's driving things nuts in the Beltway. And it's going to get kookier. It's going to get nuttier. And more wild things are going to start to happen. Because you're in this situation where you have one policy going one way and another policy going another way. And it's on a global scale. You can even see this in the Northwest. Right? You know, is the Northwest going to be a zero-growth ecotopia of IT integrated between British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon? The super Cascadia ecotopia. So we know Bill Gates and that whole crowd. They want to have the perfect ecotopia between Vancouver and Portland, and they're looking to build a high-speed rail between those two things. Now, the high-speed rail would be a good thing, but what is it for? Is it for connecting the Northwest to Asia through the Bering Strait Tunnel, or is this going to be a separatist element separating itself from Canada and the United States in the breakdown of nations, just like in Catalan and Basque is breaking apart in Spain, or these parts of the world are breaking apart because of the economic circumstances, are creating a situation where you can't hold a country together anymore because of the conditions are going down. Parts of the country that are more prosperous but are still going down want to break off from the parts that are not. The Northwest could very well be one such, example. Separatist tendencies. They're being promoted all over the world. On the other hand, you develop the infrastructure, you develop the connectivity, and you actually unify a nation. You could unify a country that way. Because now you have connections, now you have business, you have all of that. So this is where we are. And this trip by Trump could be a fundamental historic turning point. So between now and the trip, and during the trip, you can expect wilder and wilder attacks on Trump, wilder things going on. There'll probably be violent demonstrations, if not terrorist activity, between now and then. You got the situation in New York that occurred with the truck and this guy, and who knows what that's all about. But you do have Antifa and and these other groups preparing demonstrations, violent demonstrations all over the country while Trump is in Asia. You know, this is going to be played big. You know the media is going to play it big, no matter how small it is. You know they're going to play it big, and it's going to be played internationally while Trump is in Asia to try to disrupt what Trump is doing. Already, major commentators like David Gergen are calling for Trump to cancel his trip. So what's the issue? Well, in Manafort, the issue is Russia-U.S. relations. In the situation with China, it's U.S.-China relations. It's U.S.-China and Russia relations. That's where the target is. So what's being targeted? U.S.-Russia relations. And so that's where because it's out of those positive relationships that you create the circumstances for nations to actually work together. So the British Empire is coming down, you know, and many of its components are actually considering jumping ship to work within the new paradigm. But on the other hand, if chaos can be unleashed everywhere, then that will change. That would change it. China is investing a lot of money in countries that no Western financial person would ever want to invest. They would be considered too unstable. But the Chinese are looking at that country not now. They're looking at where the country will be 50 years from now from the investment in that country. So that's the difference. That's the difference between the two systems. And the United States is going through this transition. It will either be destroyed or it will become part of a new global paradigm of economic development. That's pretty much the situation.